Today we'll still be in Matthew chapter 5 if you want to turn there. Matthew chapter 5. And I had my Bible open yesterday, and I realized it's the end of March. This is the last Sunday in March. And so far this year, we have covered exactly one page of my Bible today. So we're making slow progress through the Bible. At this rate, we'll finish Matthew, I think, in 2049. But we'll see. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 down to verse 48. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 down to verse 48. It's the words of Jesus. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, well, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, well, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, and what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is the word of the Lord. So here in the Sermon on the Mount, we've been reading Jesus as he sort of gives his authoritative take on this question, what's wrong with the world? Now, you turn on the news or you can talk to anybody just with your friend group, and everybody has an opinion on what's wrong with the world. But there's never been words in the history of the human race that have been such a compelling answer to the question of what's wrong with the world as the words that Jesus speaks in this chapter. And it might at first glance look like Jesus is just giving a bunch of rules, like maybe a teacher in a classroom or a police officer making a list of, here's all the rules that you have to keep. But what Jesus is actually doing is saying, these are the rules that you've had all along. These are the rules that God gave us all at the beginning. But there's a problem with us as humans, and if you have kids, you already know this. We are always trying to find ways to step outside of the rules. Now, parents, why do we give rules to our kids? We're trying to tell our kids, listen, these rules are good for you. If you'll live this way, it will actually help you. This is a good way to live. So in our rules, we're not just trying to tell them, don't do this, don't do that. We're actually trying to show them a good life. Okay? But what do? Our kids are constantly trying to squirm their way out from underneath the control of the rules. And they're imagining, when they do that, they're saying, I think there's a better life outside of the rules. And so what Jesus is doing here is not just giving a bunch of arbitrary rules, but he's telling us, here's where our world has gone wrong, and here's what I would do to fix it. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Of course, this has been the heart of our human race since our first parents, Adam and Eve, in the garden, right? God gave them a rule. Don't eat from this tree. How did they understand that rule? They thought that rule was there to restrict them, to spoil their fun, and to wreck their life. In truth, that rule was there for them to live and to have a good life, right? And ever since then, we've been following in our parents' footsteps. Every one of us have done the same thing. We misinterpret God's rules. And so what Jesus does is he comes and he authoritatively, he lays down the line. He says, no, I'm telling you once and for all, this is the good life. Don't let anyone tell you different. That's especially important for us to realize in these verses here at the end of chapter 5, because it's probably difficult to find any verses in the whole sermon or maybe even the whole Bible where when we hear them we say, that cannot be what the good life looks like. That just cannot be the way that life is supposed to work. Now, in the verses above, just notice the difference here. In the verses above, Jesus has all talked about things that you shouldn't do. Remember, we talked about anger, raging anger. We talked about lust. We talked about initiating divorce, right? We talked about swearing dishonest oaths last week. But here, we're dealing with something different in these verses that we read today, verse 38 to 48. Jesus is talking about how do we respond when people do things to us, right? And for many of us, this is a very sensitive and a very painful topic to talk about because our lives are consumed with what so-and-so did to me, or what people have done to me in life, or the ways that I've been wronged, right? But in these verses, Jesus is telling us, listen, you're living in a world that's being wrecked and torn apart by sin. And that means, and we saw this all the way back in the Beatitudes, at the very beginning of the sermon, the Jewish people kind of thought that when God set up his wonderful kingdom that Pastor Dick was talking about, when God set up his wonderful kingdom, it would kind of be like the end of the world. So the old world would die, and then boom, there'd be this new kingdom. But in fact, Jesus teaches us about these overlapping kingdoms. So if you're here today and you're a Christian, you're a citizen of two kingdoms. You live in the kingdom of this world, but you're also transferred, you're a citizen of God's kingdom. You've got a foot in two worlds. And we're going to feel those two worlds all the time. We gather together in church. We're more aware of the one world, but day to day, Monday through Friday at work or wherever, even at home, you're going to feel the pull of that other world. So Jesus shows us, hey, as long as you're living as part of God's kingdom on this world, what can you expect? When you become a Christian, wouldn't it be wonderful if when you became a Christian, sinful people in the world lost all their ability to hurt you or to do anything wrong to you? That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Like, I'm sorry, you cannot mistreat me or abuse me or do anything to me. I've got my God's kingdom passport here, and that means you cannot do anything wrong to me. No, it doesn't work like that. Even though we're part of God's kingdom, we're still under attack. And these verses are written for people who are under attack. So if you've ever been under attack, then these verses are for you. And they tell us what we are supposed to do as we live side by side with this sinful world. And the words that Jesus speaks here are timeless, they are golden, they are eternal, they are unforgettable. When you hear these words, they've just echoed. There's many people in our country who know these words, and they don't even know where they came from, right? They don't even know where they're from. That's how powerful these words that Jesus spoke are. So Jesus has two lines that he's going to lay down here that tell us here's how we respond when people mistreat us. And I'm just guessing that some of y'all been mistreated. And so these are very important verses for us to listen to. Listen what Jesus says, verse 38. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Now, I was telling my wife yesterday, as I got ready to teach this lesson this morning, that the Sermon on the Mount, these have been some of the most difficult lessons to prepare that I've ever prepared from the Bible. And there's a stereotype that, the words of the New Testament are the words of Jesus. That's kind of the easy part of the Bible. No, it's not. They're so deep. And like I said, the fact that we've spent 3 months covering one page of the Bible, hopefully that gives you some idea of just how deep. And we could spend a lot longer. We could spend many more weeks diving into these verses in Matthew chapter 5. They're extremely difficult to really wrap our brains around. And for different reasons. But let me give you one of those. There's been a tendency among Christians in America and other places to read what Jesus says here in an absolute way. So there's Christian traditions that, for example, last week, remember what we saw last week? Jesus said, don't swear any oaths. There's Christians that said, okay, no swearing any oaths at all. I won't take an oath of office. I won't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I won't commit myself in that way at all. That's been a tradition, a pretty fringe tradition, but it's part of the Christian tradition. But the vast majority of Christians have said, though, no, it's pretty clear that's not what that means. Because there's many places in the Bible where godly people swear oaths, right? Godly people swear oaths. So when Jesus says, don't swear any oaths, what essentially all Christian interpreters have said is, okay, clearly Jesus' words are not meant to be taken absolutely literally. And we talked last week, what is Jesus really getting at there? He's saying, don't take advantage of other people's gullibility. Don't take advantage of other people's trustingness, right? That's what he's really getting at there. And the same thing is true here. There have been people that said, okay, Jesus says, you've heard it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. I know, I should never, ever resist an evil person. And I'm going to tell you this morning as plainly as I can that is not what this verse means. Now let's start with that. Where they get this idea, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. There are many Christians who have, again, taken this verse and now they think it's like bad to say eye for eye or tooth for tooth, that that's somehow a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing at all. It's actually a very, very important rule. If you look back where this was written, where they got this idea, This was given to ancient Israel by God, and he said, this is what your justice system should look like. Eye for eye and tooth for tooth. If somebody in our public sphere, if they do something to harm somebody else, then the government shall harm them in the same way. In other words, we might say it like this. Eye for an eye is good in the courtroom. It's good, that's where it belongs. It belongs in the courtroom. What's our symbol for justice that we always use? Isn't it the blindfolded lady with the scales, right? What are scales? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. That's what the scales mean. So, in other words, eye for an eye is our only standard of justice. What do we do what should we be looking for in a courtroom where there's a person who's accused of some crime? Is the judge supposed to think of some way to heal that person of whatever's ailing them? There's a lot of people who have thought that. They have a therapeutic idea about justice. Like, okay, we're real concerned about you. You murdered 5 people. We're real worried about that, so we want to find a way to heal you. It's not that judge's job. What is that judge supposed to do? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. In other words, what should happen to you is the same thing that you caused to happen to other people. That is our only standard of justice, and anything less than that in our world is not just. So that's the absolute standard of justice. And that prohibits, so what eye for an eye means is no partiality is allowed. If I come into the courtroom and I knocked out Seth's eye, I seem to pick on Seth every week, but I come into the courtroom because I punched Seth and I made him lose his eye, but I'm buddies with the judge. Is the judge supposed to say, well, he's my buddy, so I'm going to let him off? No, you see, eye for eye says, no, I don't care if you're his buddy. Eye for an eye. That's the only standard of justice. So that's what eye for an eye means. And that was really important back then because back then you could have these feuds that would escalate. Like you hurt somebody from my family, so I come hurt someone from your family. And then you come hurt 2 people from my family. I go kill 1 person from your family. You come kill 2 people from my family. And it escalates. But that principle of an eye for an eye said, no. You cannot escalate. Justice must be done, and justice must be absolutely equal. Okay? So that's what it was good. It's good for that. And you could write eye for an eye in front of every courtroom in this country, and Christians should say, amen, that's exactly what we ought to see happen in the courtroom. But you see what happened to these people is they read that, eye for an eye, and they thought that was something they could do. They thought, eye for an eye, good. Now I can go through life, and anybody that does anything to me, I can do the same thing right back to them. Like, you're not the judge. This is not a courtroom. And no, you may not act like that. You may not personally adjudicate the eye for an eye principle. Jesus says, in fact, that this is destructive. Now, again, so in other words, when Jesus says, do not resist an evil person, we should understand this as the opposite of an eye for an eye. Okay? Do not resist an evil person. Now, let's talk about some things that this does not mean, and then we'll work our way towards what it does mean. First of all, as we just said, clearly authorities have a duty to resist evil people, right? Imagine calling the police, and the police, I'm sorry, Jesus said don't resist an evil person. We can't come out and help save you from that. We don't resist evil people around here. That's what Jesus taught us to do. It's like, you're the police, you need to resist evil people. Please come out here and help me resist, right? Also, self-defense is not negated here. Self-defense is not negated. There's been Christians who have said, well, if somebody broke into my home and they wanted to hurt my family or to rob me, Jesus said, do not resist an evil person. And I will tell you, in the name of the Lord, you can take your gun and shoot that person. Okay? That's not what that means. We'll talk in a second about what it does mean. Notice, though, that Jesus, what he lists here, he does not list violent assaults or robbery of your property. He says somebody slaps you in the face, turn them the other cheek as well. Was it illegal to slap somebody in the face? No. It was an insult. It was not assault. If you had violently hurt somebody, then you could do something about that. You had legal recourse. So Jesus is not outlawing what we might call legal recourse. Christians, we are allowed legal recourse. If somebody wants to hurt you, you can use the legal authorities to try to do whatever you can to stop it. You can resist in legal ways. That is totally justified. You can also resist for others' sake. Let's say you walk down the street and you see somebody who's beating up a weaker person. As a Christian, can you intervene, or should you say, no, Jesus said, do not resist an evil person. You can intervene. In fact, you should, as a Christian, bravely intervene in that person who's being hurt or being assaulted. So none of that is what it means by do not resist an evil person. And it also doesn't mean, listen, the easiest thing to do with the Sermon on the Mount is turn it into like the cotton candy Sermon on the Mount, where everything is read as the most like sweet, vapid thing you've ever read. Whereas Jesus, like, listen, not that eye for an eye stuff. Just love one another. Everybody just love one another. Notice he says, don't resist a what kind of person? An evil person. Jesus has no problem looking at somebody and saying, that's an evil person right there. And what they're doing is evil. So if you've adopted a form of Christianity where you don't go around and identifying things as evil, then you don't have the same brand of Christianity that Jesus got. Because Jesus has no problem saying, you're being attacked by an evil person right now. So what does it mean to not resist an evil person? Again, notice he says, the first example he gives, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. This is not a violent criminal assault. This is just an insult. But friend, what do we do when somebody insults us? What is your first response? We want to immediately respond in kind. Somebody hurts my feelings, they do anything that I don't like, what's the first thing I do? I want to give it back to them as fast as possible and maybe even a little harsher. So what Jesus says, turn the other cheek, he doesn't mean invite it. He doesn't mean go around saying, somebody come over here and smack me, please. I want to honor the Lord. Somebody smack me, please. Or somebody insults me, please insult me again. That's not what he means at all. But it's an exaggerated way. Jesus likes to use exaggeration. Okay? He uses an exaggerated way to show just how far away you are from retaliating. If I hit somebody, what do I expect coming back my way? That person to hit me back. But Jesus says that should be so far from your mind that you would sooner ask for another punch. I would rather ask for another punch than to give you one back. Or an insult. Again, this is not criminal behavior we're talking about here. This is just the petty stuff. And what do? We immediately enter tit for tat mode. You did to me, and so now I'm going to do to you. We immediately begin plotting our revenge. And especially, remember, all these questions, Jesus is pushing morality from the surface, like the Pharisees. He's pushing it down into the soil of our hearts. He's calling us to examine our hearts. So what we get here is not Jesus saying, here's exactly what you do. If somebody does this to you, here's exactly what I expect you to do. Rather, he's calling us to examine, friend, what is going on in your heart? What rises up when somebody smacks you in the face? When you get an insult, when an evil person just treats you in a way they have no business treating you. What happens in your heart? Oh, I know what happens in my heart. I'm ready to go to war, right? I'm ready to exchange. And many times we take, however a person acts towards me, that immediately gives me permission to act towards them. What if they say this, then I'm allowed to say that back at them, or words that I think are similarly weighty, right? I can act towards another person exactly as they've acted towards me. Yes, but God sees even our hearts. And let me say this, sometimes he says don't resist an evil person. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to resist an evil person. Sometimes that's how you love a person, is by resisting their evil. So first of all, I'm telling you, don't absolutize those words that Jesus says, do not resist an evil person. But what he does teach us is, I am not going to retaliate, and I'm not going to descend into a petty, insulting war. But look at Facebook. Spend like 2 seconds on Facebook and tell me this isn't exactly what goes on in our world, right? Somebody says something I don't like in the comments, well, I got to say a comment. And that person's going to say a comment back, I'm going to say a comment. They haven't learned to turn the other cheek. Now, I would say, if I want to be careful here, I really put a lot of thought into how we apply these verses. Again, they're so weighty. I want to be careful how we apply these. Of course, there is such a thing as truly abusive behavior. I want to say that. It is possible that people are, there's such a thing as physical abuse, and I think probably psychological and emotional abuse too. Those are a thing. But I would just say, it's pretty obvious to me anyway, as I've tried to pastor, that we've taken that word abuse and we've begun to paint with very broad strokes with that. And now, essentially, everything is abuse. Anytime that anyone has done something to me that I don't really like, that's abuse. And I think the reason we want to call it that is because then I am authorized, I'm in my right to retaliate because it's abuse, right? And I would just say, I of course believe that there are all kinds of ways that people do truly harm one another. But it is wrong. There's a reason Jesus gives this slap on the face thing. Because slap on the face didn't hurt you. You don't even feel that slap on the face in a little bit. But it hurts you deep down in your heart, right? It hurts your pride. And so what is wrong is to take some of these slaps in the face so deeply. Some of the things, I think, that some of the things that nowadays we like to call abuse are just glorified slaps in the face. They were an insult to your dignity. They were an insult to your pride or whatever. And it is inappropriate, I think Jesus says here, I want to be careful, it is inappropriate for a Christian to be so thin-skinned and wounded that we take everything so seriously and we take our wounds so deeply. To fill everyone's ears with your hurt, to get on social media and to talk about all the ways that you've been done wrong. Today people want to start face slap survivor groups. I'm a survivor. I was slapped in the face. Let me tell you all about it. I think it takes wisdom. I'm going to be careful. It takes wisdom to know the difference between a slap in the face that you should just shrug off and assault that you should take seriously. My guess is that we should always be quick to expose the hidden things. I would say if somebody's trying to hide something or you should never be embarrassed to talk about or to be open about the ways that you've been hurt. That's totally fine. That's completely fine. To bring the hidden things to light, to say things that have happened, that's totally fine. But I think Jesus is talking about an attitude of the heart here. What's your attitude? Are you walking around just boiling, seething, or wounded, and mopey over the way that you were treated? Now, the next two involve coercion. Okay, so this is other things that evil people might do to you. Notice he says, verse 40, and notice these two are also legal. They're legal. You have no legal recourse in these situations. Verse 40, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one, we'll talk about give to the one who asks you in a second. So if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat too. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Now, praise God, we live in the land of the free. And that means our society has been uniquely crafted. American society has been uniquely crafted with liberty and freedom in mind. That means it's even difficult for us to imagine situations where we're forced to do things. We're actually forced to do very little. Okay? Now, let me show you even a proof here that we're allowed to resist an evil person. Notice he says, if someone, verse 40, wants to sue you and take your shirt, why do they got to sue you? Because you didn't give your shirt. They wanted it. You wouldn't give it, so then I got to sue you for it, right? If you just didn't resist an evil person and handed over your shirt, you never would have had to go to court to begin with. But the question this verse is talking about is, well, what happens when you lose the lawsuit? What happens when you lose the lawsuit? What happens when the powers that be force you to do things? And they will force you to do things. Not as, praise God, not all that much. No, we live in a pretty free nation. But sometimes you are forced to do things. How should you respond to that? Should you be just boiling over that? Angry over that? Seeking for an opportunity to get revenge? No. Jesus tells us, no, that is not the way that we respond. We cheerfully accept it as a providence of God. So when you've done everything you can to resist and it still don't work, you fought it in court and it still didn't work, you still lost. What should your attitude be like? You should still have your peace. You should still have your joy. You should still have your love. You should not be stressed out. You should trust the Lord and his gracious providence. That's what happens. When everything is gone, when everything has gone wrong and you've already lost, that's all that you can do. Okay, is to trust the Lord in it, to take it in stride and to keep your joy. I've been introduced to my kids a little bit. Everest always likes superheroes, so we've been watching some of those Captain America movies. And the thing that's, I want to point this out because these verses are perceived as like the most weakling thing that's ever been written. A lot of people don't like the Bible because of verses like this. They think it'll turn you into a weakling. I want to show you it's actually a heroic strength. There's this part of this Captain America, who's, of course, the quintessential American hero. And he gets beat up, he gets knocked down, he's unjustly attacked, right? And he's got this line that he says, he gets beat up and his enemies think they've knocked him down, and he always gets up and he says, I could do this all day. In other words, you see, that's a heroic strength that says, you think you've hurt me? I could do this all day. I could do this all. So when he stands up and he says, you slap me on this cheek, I could do this all day. I can put up with way more than that. You sue me, you take my shirt, I can put up with way more than that. See, a person who's always walking around wounded and grieving the way that people have hurt them or taken advantage of them, what are they saying? I can't take this. I can't take it. They push me beyond my breaking point. But as a Christian, we should have a buoyancy, a joy, a peace, a love, a cheerfulness that says, I can give way more than that. You can hurt me way more than that. I could do this all day. I can put up with way more of this through Christ who gives me strength. That should be our Christian power that we have. There's a great verse that I love. 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, and he found that they had not learned this lesson. They're actually suing each other over stuff. People in the church are suing one another over stuff. And I love this thing that Paul says to them. He says, he tells them a bunch of things, but one of the things he says toward the end there is he says, why don't you just let yourselves be wronged? It's like a brilliant idea they hadn't thought of. Like, why don't you just deal with it? Instead of going to court over it, why don't you just deal with it? And he's like, I bet you didn't even think of that, did you? And isn't that true, though? When somebody insults us or hurts us or mistreats us, do we even think for a second of the possibility of, does it even cross our mind that we could just take it? Again, I've been pastoring for enough years to know that a lot of people, it does not cross their mind. They don't even realize that that's an option, to just take it. Just take it on the chin. A lot of people think it's absolutely not possible. I know even in my own household, if my wife says something to me that I feel is a little insulting or not, a little beneath my dignity, I find oftentimes it doesn't even cross my mind that I can just not retaliate or not strike back, right? It doesn't even cross my mind. And so it's actually kind of profound that Paul says, hey, did you ever think about just dealing with it? And I think for many of us, that's the word from the Lord for us today. Do you ever think about just dealing with it and putting up with it through Christ who gives you strength? Now, the next two he gives are about giving. The last one, verse 42, I'm sorry. He says, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Again, it is just not possible to read that in an absolute way, or you're going to run out of money by the end of this week. Because every beggar that comes up asking for money, you're going to say, okay. Jesus said to give to everybody who asks of you. Okay. Somebody asks you for help. Somebody asks you for your time. Someone asks for your money. You're just going to be bankrupt by the end of the week. You're going to give to everybody, right? Even when it's clear. Isn't it true, though, friends? There's some people that we know to give to them is what they're asking for is actually not what they need. It would be very, very bad for them. Maybe some of you work at places where you're regularly encountering people who are asking you for things that you should definitely not give to them. You say, well, Jesus said, give to the one who asks of you. Don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, Jesus is pushing down into our hearts. And here's the question he's asking you. What is your mindset? Are you basically a giver or are you basically a taker? How would people describe you? How would people in your life describe you? How would your wife describe you? Your husband? How would your kids? How would your coworkers? How would your neighbors? How would your fellow church members, how would they describe you? As basically a giver or basically a taker? Now, let me give you some examples here. Here's what a giver mindset, here's someone who lacks a giver mindset. I'm trying to do as little of the workload as possible and to get others to do as much as possible. Not a giver. I'm trying to spend my family's money in the ways that I like, and I'm not thinking so much about what the other people in my family might like. Not a giver. I'm grumbling when I am called away from my time of rest or doing what I enjoy in order to help others with their problems. Not a giver. I have a bad attitude when my group, my church, my family, my school makes a decision that I don't like. Not a giver. I don't care how what I do inconveniences or annoys those around me. Not a giver. I will not volunteer to serve in needed ways because it's not really my thing. It doesn't spark joy. Not a giver, right? So Jesus is saying, are you basically a giver or are you basically a taker? That's the mindset that he's pushing for us to have here. See, the eye for an eye thinking says, what's in it for me? You come asking me for something, what am I immediately start calculating. Okay, you're asking for this for me. What have you done for me lately? And what might you do for me in the future? See, the eye for an eye is thinking. I shouldn't give to you unless you've given to me. Jesus says, don't be like that. Embrace the giving mindset. Okay? That eye for an eye thinking in our hearts is tearing our world apart. This is the world that we live in. We live in the face-slapping, lawsuit-bringing, taking mindset kind of a world. That's the world that we live in. And that's exactly what Jesus says must come to an end. And Jesus has come to bring it to an end, and it's going to come to an end. In a minute, we'll talk about how Jesus is going to bring that to an end. But first, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to show you this last part here. Verse 43, Jesus said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, first of all, they said they got this from the Bible. No, they didn't. They got the first 3 words from the Bible, love your neighbors. Did the Bible anywhere say hate your enemies? No, they just filled in that part. They thought they could figure it out. They said, well, love your neighbors. Well, that must mean not everybody's my neighbor. And if I don't have to love them, then it must be okay to hate them. So there must be people it's okay to hate. I must hate my enemies. Love your neighbor and hate your enemies. And this is something that Jesus talks about actually quite a bit in his ministry. And he says, actually, when God says your neighbor, who does he mean? He means everybody you're seeing. He means everybody in your life. He means everybody that you see on a day-to-day basis. Those are all your neighbors. Anybody that you're close enough to impact is your neighbor. Okay? And again, notice he's assuming that we're actually in the right here. Verse 44, love your enemies. Who are our enemies? And pray for those who persecute you. So these aren't just people that I've got like a beef with. These are people that are attacking me for righteousness' sake. They're people that don't like me because of what I stand, because I'm following after Jesus Christ. I'm being persecuted unjustly. And what does he say here? Love your enemies and pray for them. Love them and pray for them. Now, love is not to be read here in a sentimental way. It doesn't mean send them a Valentine's Day card and buy them chocolates and roses. It doesn't mean in your heart you just got this warm, every time I think about my enemy who hates my guts, I just have this warm feeling in my heart. That's just not what it means, and good luck trying to come up with that anyway. It's just not going to happen. If you have a real enemy, you're just not going to feel a warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart about them. No, this love and hate is a common Jewish way of saying, do good to them. Because what do you do for people that you love, just naturally? What do you do for your kids? What do you do for your spouse, your friends? You do good to them. You love them, so you do good to them. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, what does he mean? Do good to your enemies as if you had that warm, fuzzy feeling inside. Don't worry about the warm, fuzzy feeling. Just do good to them. And that praying there is key. What is the best thing that we as Christians can do for another person? What's the best thing? I'm telling you, if you had $1 million in the bank, the best thing that you could do for another person would not be to write them a check for $1 million. The best thing that you could do would be to pray for them. There's no better way to do good to somebody than to pray to the living God on their behalf. Okay? So Jesus says, hey, you're part of my kingdom. You're on the inside. You see those people on the outside, they're attacking you. They're enemies to you. How should you respond to them? Do good to them. Pray for them. That means sincerely desire for them to prosper. So let's think. Think about your enemies for a second. Think about the people that, if they walked in this room, that you'd want to get up and leave. Think about the people that you cannot, in good conscience, have a normal relationship with anymore. People that you've had to cut out of your life. Do you sincerely desire for them to thrive? Do you desire for them to prosper? Do you desire for things to be well with them? For their business to go well? For their job to be successful? For their kids to turn out right? For their marriage to be happy? For them to be healthy? Right? Or are you secretly rooting for their downfall? Right? Now, friends, there absolutely are. Again, don't try to absolutize these words as if Jesus is saying you must go and be best friends with your enemies. That's just not what the Bible teaches. There are people that you will have to cut out of your life. There will be people that, because of their sin, you just absolutely cannot have a normal relationship with them. But again, he's pressing into your heart. What's going on inside? What do you want? Do you want them to thrive? Do you want them to be blessed? Can you pray for them in good conscience? Can you pray for God to bless those people? That's what Jesus is calling us to do. Just like in the Beatitudes, what did Jesus say? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And what does he say here? Notice what he says, verse 45. So you do this, you love your enemies, verse 45, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Like Father, like Son. What kind of God is God? What kind of God is he? He's a God who does real good to his enemies. He does real good to his enemies. How do I know that? Every enemy that God has, every breath of air that they take, every time their heart beats, every meal that they eat, that was given to them by their number one enemy, God. God gave them all things. So he says, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. And he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God doesn't just give sunshine to the good people and doesn't just send rain on the gardens of the good people. He sends his rain over all. He causes his sun to shine over all. God gives to evil ones all that they enjoy. Now, of course, does God also finally judge and punish evildoers? Yes, he does. But if you're trying to imagine God as some kind of vindictive person who all he does is want to grind his enemies to a powder and destroy them, then you're not paying any attention at all. What is the obvious thing about God? His incredible goodness to his enemies. His incredible goodness to his enemies. You know, it's just like soldiers. If good soldiers for a good nation fighting a good war, they do all sorts of violent things. But their moral alignment, they are aligned with the good. And we would say the same thing about God. Does God do all sorts of things that seem to us very violent in a world? Of course he does. Yes, he does. But can anyone doubt God's fundamental goodness? No, you can't doubt his goodness. If you've come into God's family, then there will be a kind of perfection, he says in verse 48. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. What is God like? I got to think, what does this mean? And this, you can read a bunch of different books, have different ideas of what it means to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But I'm going to tell you what I think it means. What is God like? He's just this. He's a giant of goodness. It's a magnificent sun shining down on a world. God is a source of incredible goodness. And he's perfect. He's complete. He just gives that goodness. He's sure that he was going to do for the evil and for the unrighteous. He was not just going to give them rain. He was not just going to give them sunshine. He was going to send them his son. Jesus is there. Jesus is there as the greatest gift of God to evil people. Jesus has come, and what is he going to do? He's going to pay the price of our sins. He's going to pay the price for our sins. And at the same time, he's going to show us the way to live. Think about Jesus. The only person who's ever lived up to these 10 verses is Jesus Christ. Think about Jesus on the way to the cross. He prays for those who are killing him. Prays for them to be forgiven. He prays blessing on the people that are killing him. He heals and serves the people that are killing him. He forgives them. He did not retaliate. He did not use his force to retaliate against those who were mistreating him. And when he's on the cross, he's thinking about other people, not a selfish thought, not one selfish thought. That's what Jesus does. And when you meet Jesus, when you come to him, he teaches us to live like this. Slowly, bit by bit, he teaches us to live like this. Because I have to say, if he loved me like that, then how can I turn around and be a snob or be selfish or be a taker when he loved me like that? Right? So his love will finally come to transform us. The grace that God gives, he gives his greatest grace of all in Jesus Christ. It's what he gives to the wicked. And so, friend, if you're not a Christian yet, if you haven't come to Jesus, you haven't been baptized, you haven't trusted in him, you're not following after Jesus, boy, we would invite you today. And our promise to you as a church is this, that we will do our very best to live up to what Jesus says here in our dealings with you. That we will do our best to love you, to serve you, to give to you. That we will not hold grudges against you, that we will greet you and welcome you into our fellowship, and that we won't hold back and that we will serve you as God gives us strength. Let's pray together.